You're just another face in the crowd, moving quickly through security, grabbing a coffee, and thinking about the endless pile of emails waiting for you back home. You're busy. You've got a plan, and nothing is going to stop you from reaching your destination. But then, bam, everything changes in a single moment. You trip. Not over a crack in the floor or a stray bag, but over her luggage. That moment of clumsy collision with someone you don't know will alter the course of your life. Sound strange? It's not as unbelievable as it sounds. In fact, for one man, it was the beginning of a billion-dollar idea that would reshape an entire industry. Now, I know what you're thinking. What could possibly come from tripping over a suitcase? It sounds like a random, funny accident, right? Maybe a bit of embarrassment, a quick apology, and you go on with your life. But trust me when I tell you that this seemingly insignificant moment was the spark for something much bigger, something that would ultimately change the way we travel and do business today. The story you're about to hear is not just about a trip, or a stumble over luggage. It's about seizing an opportunity when it presents itself, even when that opportunity looks like nothing more than a small inconvenience in the grand scheme of your day. You see, the man who tripped over her luggage wasn't just some random traveler. He wasn't someone used to letting life pass him by, letting the small moments slip through his fingers unnoticed. No. This man was sharp. He was already tuned into the rhythm of the world around him, looking for patterns, seeking out problems that needed solving. And when his foot connected with her suitcase, it wasn't just an accident. It was a wake-up call. He saw something in that moment. Something that no one else saw, or maybe they just didn't think about it in the same way. And what he saw changed everything. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's rewind a little. It was an ordinary day, at least it seemed that way on the surface. The airport was crowded as usual, and travelers scurried about, each lost in their own little world. There were those who rushed to catch flights, the ones who spent the entire time scrolling through their phones, oblivious to their surroundings. And then there were those who had that extra touch of impatience, the ones who were always too fast, always in too much of a hurry to really stop and think about their actions. Among them was a woman who had just placed her oversized suitcase right in the middle of a busy walkway. She was distracted, her mind focused on something else, perhaps the long flight ahead of her, or the emails she had to send once she landed. Her suitcase, though, it wasn't just any suitcase. No, this particular bag was about to play a key role in a multi-million-dollar venture. Enter our main character, the man who was simply trying to make his way to his gate, just another face in the crowd. He wasn't looking for adventure that day. He wasn't searching for anything unusual to happen. He just had a flight to catch. And then, in a split second, his foot caught the corner of her suitcase. The sudden trip threw him off balance, sending him into a stumble that caught the attention of nearly everyone nearby. The woman, startled by the collision, shot him an angry look as he steadied himself. He, of course, muttered an apology and tried to move on. Most people would. They would shake off the awkwardness and continue about their business. But not him. Not this man. He wasn't just going to walk away from the incident. No, instead, something inside of him clicked. He saw an opportunity, one that, at the time, no one else had noticed. But what exactly was it that he saw? Why did this one moment spark such a profound idea? Why did a simple, albeit clumsy, interaction change his entire perspective on business, travel, and the way we interact with the world around us? That's the part of the story that you might find surprising, because it's not just about business, it's about recognizing patterns in the chaos of everyday life. It's about seeing an opportunity where others see only frustration. It's about turning a small mistake into something much, much bigger than anyone could have ever imagined. What he came up with that day, from something as simple as tripping over luggage, was a billion-dollar idea that would eventually change the way companies around the world approached innovation. Now, I can hear you wondering, how does something as trivial as a suitcase lead to anything groundbreaking? You're probably skeptical, right? And that's exactly why you're in the perfect place to hear this story. Trust me, by the time we're done, you'll be amazed at how something so seemingly insignificant can lead to something so monumental. And no, this isn't a story about luck. It's about vision, insight, and timing. It's about taking a moment that would normally pass unnoticed and turning it into the opportunity of a lifetime. So, let's break this down a little further. Let's peel back the layers of this incredible journey. As our main character dusted himself off and continued toward his gate, little did he know, the seeds of a new idea had already been planted. The thoughts swirling in his mind were about more than just the luggage, or even the accident itself. He wasn't thinking about how embarrassing it was or how awkward the situation had been. No, he was thinking about why that suitcase was there in the first place. Why had she left it in such an inconvenient spot? Why was it taking up space, obstructing the flow of foot traffic? Was there a better way for travelers to manage their bags? Were there other solutions to problems like this one? And it didn't take long for him to realize that what seemed like a random incident was actually part of a much bigger, and far more important, problem that travelers everywhere were facing. The more he thought about it, the more he began to see potential solutions. He started to notice how every single traveler seemed to have similar issues with luggage. Whether it was waiting for bags at the carousel, struggling to find a place to store them overhead, or just the constant juggling of bags while trying to navigate crowded airports, there were constant frustrations that no one had really addressed in a meaningful way. And that's when it hit him. That clumsy moment, that seemingly insignificant encounter, was the catalyst for something revolutionary. I know, you're probably still wondering what exactly happened after that, right? How did a trip over a suitcase turn into one of the most successful ideas in modern business? Well, let me tell you, what came next was nothing short of a rollercoaster ride. The idea began to take shape, and soon, our main character found himself diving deep into the problem. He started researching, testing, and developing a concept that would eventually transform the entire luggage industry. But I'm not going to give it all away just yet. What I will say is this: sometimes, life's biggest breakthroughs happen in the most unexpected places. A stumble, a minor inconvenience, can lead to the kind of idea that changes everything. So stick around, because you're about to witness how one man's quick thinking turned an embarrassing moment into the next billion-dollar empire. You won't want to miss the rest of this incredible story. Yes, the man made his way through the bustling terminal, still shaken by the accidental stumble over the woman's luggage. He couldn't help but feel a sense of unease gnawing at him. His mind was racing, but it wasn't just the embarrassment of the moment that lingered, it was something deeper, a nagging thought that had been haunting him for weeks. He had been feeling this growing restlessness for some time now, a sense that the life he had been leading was no longer enough. He was on the verge of something big, but he just couldn't put his finger on what it was. And now, as he walked through the airport, the pieces seemed to be falling into place, slowly, almost reluctantly, but never quite lining up in the way he expected. You see, this man wasn't some random business traveler. His name was Ethan Mercer, and though he had the look of a guy who was constantly on the go, pressed shirt, sharp briefcase, and a mind always preoccupied with the next deal, he was, in fact, at a crossroads in his life. Ethan had always been the type to make things happen. He'd built a successful career in the tech industry, moving from startup to startup, carving out a name for himself as a savvy, quick-witted entrepreneur. His relationships, however, had never been as smooth. He wasn't the kind of guy who made friends easily. He was far more comfortable with business transactions than with small talk. His personal life was a string of fleeting romances, half-hearted friendships, and an ever-growing list of failed attempts to find real connection. His work consumed him, always had, always would. But recently, Ethan had begun to feel that the fast-paced tech world he had once thrived in wasn't enough. The constant grind, the endless cycle of new projects and investor meetings, the chase for the next big thing, it all started to feel empty. He'd been spending too much time alone in his office, trying to force innovation, trying to push boundaries, but nothing seemed to stick. His last venture, a cutting-edge app aimed at revolutionizing social media, had flopped. Sure, it garnered some attention initially, but the hype faded, and the investors quickly pulled out. It was a painful blow to his ego, and even though he tried to keep it together, the weight of that failure lingered over him like a shadow he couldn't shake. As if the universe had decided it was time to remind him of his own vulnerability, that fateful stumble at the airport felt like a cruel joke. It was as though his life had been building up to this one seemingly insignificant moment, a moment that was about to shift everything. But here's where things get complicated. Was it really just a random accident, or was it something more? Could the encounter with the woman and her suitcase have been the catalyst for a much bigger plan he wasn't even aware of yet? The more Ethan thought about it, the more the events of the day seemed to line up in strange, almost deliberate ways. His mind was spinning, and yet, he couldn't quite figure out what his instincts were telling him. Was it a new opportunity, or was something darker at play? What made the situation even more puzzling was the fact that he had been dealing with some heavy pressures on the personal front as well. His last meeting had been with a group of high-profile investors who had come to him with an intriguing proposal. They wanted to back him again, this time for a completely different type of venture. At first, Ethan had been skeptical, thinking it was just another way to get him back into the game, to keep him on the treadmill of startup life. But something about the offer lingered with him, more than he wanted to admit. These investors weren't your typical venture capitalists. They had a reputation for taking risks that others wouldn't dare. Their interests weren't just in tech, but in more unconventional industries. And one of their key players had been, well, let's just say it was someone Ethan wasn't exactly thrilled to be involved with. A man named Gregory Hale, a former mentor turned rival, had been pushing Ethan for a partnership for years. Hale was smooth, persuasive, and always seemed to know the right buttons to press. Ethan had a history with him, one that wasn't exactly clean, and now, Hale's presence in the room with the investors made Ethan uneasy, to say the least. It wasn't just the business deal that had him on edge. There were rumors swirling about Hale's methods unconventional, to put it lightly, and Ethan wasn't sure if he was ready to play in those kinds of waters. Hale had a reputation for bending the rules, cutting corners, and getting things done by any means necessary. Ethan had always kept his distance from him, but the stakes were higher than ever now, and he couldn't afford to turn down the offer outright. The thought of going back to square one, of failing again, was terrifying. So, when he got the call about this new project, he was caught in a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Was he ready to dive back into a world that didn't quite sit right with him anymore? Could he trust these investors, and especially Gregory Hale, or was he walking into a trap? As he sat in the airport lounge, nursing a coffee and trying to shake off the unsettling feeling that had been creeping up on him all day, Ethan's thoughts kept returning to the woman whose suitcase he had tripped over. What was her role in all of this? He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her than just some random traveler. There was something about her calm demeanor as he apologized, her eyes locking with his for a brief moment that felt oddly deliberate. It wasn't just the annoyance of the moment, it was the way she held herself, like someone who had been through 1,000 airports and knew exactly how to play the game. The way she looked at him, it almost seemed like she recognized him. Was it possible that she was somehow connected to the investors, or even to Hale himself? Or was it all just coincidence, an overactive mind looking for patterns where none existed? Ethan's gut told him to dig deeper, but something held him back. Maybe he was just paranoid, or maybe he had stumbled onto something bigger than he realized. With the next flight boarding in the distance, Ethan stood up and headed toward the gate, his thoughts still swirling in every direction. But there was one thing he couldn't shake, that suitcase. In the grand scheme of things, it seemed insignificant, a momentary inconvenience. But in the back of his mind, something told him that this accident, this small collision in an airport terminal, wasn't just random. Something had changed in that moment, something that would set a chain of events into motion. And as he walked toward the gate, he felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up, like he was about to step into a new world, one that he wasn't sure he was ready for. Was he walking into an opportunity, or was he being pulled into something darker? The more he thought about it, the less he knew for sure. All he could do was keep moving forward. But the question remained, was it already too late to turn back? The next few days after that fateful encounter at the airport were a blur for Ethan. His mind kept racing, trying to piece together the fragments of what had happened. He couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Everything seemed too coincidental. The woman, the suitcase, the sudden offer from the investors, it was as if the universe had conspired to draw him into a situation he wasn't prepared for. The more he tried to think it through, the more questions he had, and with each passing moment, those questions only grew. His first move was obvious. He tried to track down the woman. After all, how many people could have been in that same part of the airport at that exact time? He could easily find her flight details from the airport records, right? It should have been simple. But when he called the airport security team to request the information, he was met with an unexpected roadblock. The clerk, who was surprisingly unhelpful, told him that records like that were confidential and wouldn't be released without the proper legal clearance. He hadn't anticipated such a response, he had expected a quick, easy answer. But the more he pressed, the more defensive the clerk became, as if there was something more going on than he was being told. He tried to smooth things over, but the encounter left him with an unsettling feeling. Someone was hiding something. Determined not to be deterred, Ethan decided to take matters into his own hands. He went back to the terminal, hoping to get a closer look at the exact spot where he'd tripped over the suitcase. Maybe there would be anything that could lead him to the woman, or at least help him figure out why he was so drawn to the incident. But when he arrived, things took an even stranger turn. The area around the spot where the suitcase had been was completely cleared, as if the space had been sanitized in some way. There was no trace of the moment. No sign of the chaotic scene that had played out just days before. The cleaners had come through, sure, but this felt different, like someone had deliberately made sure there was nothing left behind to uncover. His curiosity piqued, Ethan began searching the area more intensely, hoping to find some small clue he might have missed. As he turned a corner, he spotted something that made his heart skip a beat: an abandoned backpack, half hidden behind a row of chairs. Without thinking, he walked over and grabbed it. Maybe, just maybe, it belonged to the woman. He opened it, his fingers trembling with anticipation, but as he rifled through the contents, he was met with an unexpected surprise. There was nothing inside except for a thick envelope, sealed shut. His breath caught as he examined it. The envelope wasn't marked, not even with a name or an address, just a simple, unassuming piece of paper. Ethan's mind raced. What was this? What could it be? Before he could think too much about it, something else caught his eye: a small, inconspicuous figure standing near the entrance of the terminal. The figure seemed to be watching him, and when their eyes met, they quickly turned and disappeared into the crowd. Ethan's gut twisted with suspicion. Was this someone keeping an eye on him? Was it possible that someone knew he was getting closer to something? He had to act fast, but he felt the weight of uncertainty bearing down on him. Just as he was about to slip the envelope into his jacket pocket, someone else stepped into the scene. A familiar voice called out to him. "Ethan, I wouldn't do that if I were you." It was Gregory Hale. The man who had, up until now, seemed like an ally, a mentor of sorts in the business world, but one who Ethan had always kept at arm's length. Hale stood there, his eyes cold and calculating. His voice was smooth, almost too smooth, as he made his way toward Ethan. "What are you doing here? And with that bag?" Ethan froze, his hand still on the envelope. He hadn't expected Hale to show up, not now, and not in this particular situation. He tried to play it cool, slipping the envelope back into the bag and standing up straight. I was just looking for something. Nothing important." But Hale wasn't convinced. He raised an eyebrow, a smirk tugging at the corners of his lips. "I see. Well, I'd advise you to be careful, Ethan. There are things going on here that you don't want to get involved in. Trust me." Ethan's mind reeled. Hale's warning felt more like a threat than friendly advice. But why? What did Hale know that Ethan didn't? And why was he so concerned? The unease that had been building inside of him over the past few days intensified. Hale was no stranger to pulling strings behind the scenes, but was he really involved in all of this? Was he trying to protect Ethan, or was he keeping something from him? Before Ethan could respond, Hale's tone shifted slightly. "Listen, I know you've been trying to dig into things. And I get it. You're ambitious. But this isn't the path you want to go down. People are watching you. People are always watching. You're better off letting this go." Ethan's chest tightened. The warning, the urgency in Hale's voice, it wasn't just about business anymore. There was something more sinister lurking beneath the surface, something Ethan hadn't anticipated. Hale's sudden appearance, his insistence that Ethan stop looking into the situation, felt too convenient. Was he trying to protect him, or was he trying to silence him? And just as Ethan was about to confront Hale with the 1,000 questions racing through his mind, The door to the terminal suddenly swung open. A tall man with a stern expression entered, scanning the room with laser focus. It was a look Ethan had seen before, someone who meant business, someone who wasn't afraid to make things uncomfortable. Ethan didn't recognize him at first, but the man's gaze locked on him for a moment too long. Hale's posture stiffened. He shot Ethan a look, then turned toward the man, his expression shifting from calm to something more guarded. "This isn't the right time," Hale muttered, his voice low enough that Ethan almost didn't catch it. Before Ethan could make sense of the situation, the man walked toward them, and just as quickly as he had appeared, he spoke directly to Hale. "The situation is escalating faster than we anticipated. We need to talk. Now." Ethan's head spun. Who was this man? What did he know about the envelope, about the woman, about the investors? And most importantly, what was Hale not telling him? The pieces of the puzzle were slipping further out of reach, and the deeper Ethan dug, the more he realized that the story he was chasing was bigger and more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. With a nervous glance back at Hale and the mysterious man, Ethan realized that the walls were closing in. But what was worse was the nagging feeling that someone, somewhere, was pulling the strings, someone who knew more than they were letting on. Ethan had to decide, keep digging, no matter the cost, or walk away before it was too late. But as the weight of the situation pressed down on him, he wasn't sure which way was the right path. One thing was certain, though, whatever was happening, it was far from over. The real story, the truth, was just beginning to unfold. As Ethan watched the mysterious man and Hale exchange a few hurried words, the weight of the situation became almost unbearable. The tension in the air was thick, palpable, so thick, in fact, that it seemed to cling to the very walls of the terminal. Hale glanced at Ethan one last time, his face now a mask of professional indifference, before turning to lead the man away. But just as they were about to disappear into the crowd, Ethan's phone buzzed in his pocket, a sudden jolt of panic running through him. He pulled it out quickly, heart pounding, and saw a new message from his assistant, MIA. "Where are you? I think someone is following me." Ethan froze. His stomach dropped, a cold sweat creeping up his neck. MIA was no stranger to the world of business, and she had always been sharp and invaluable ally when it came to keeping him on track. They had worked together for years, and while their relationship was professional, there was a certain trust between them. For her to say someone was following her was a red flag that couldn't be ignored. His fingers hovered over the screen, typing quickly. "Are you okay? What do you mean, someone's following you?" Seconds later, her reply came through, "I don't know. It's hard to explain. But it's like they know where I'm going. I just saw the same person a few times today. I think they're watching me." Ethan's thoughts spiraled. Was she just being paranoid? Or was she involved in something she didn't even realize? The connection between MIA and the mystery surrounding the investors was tenuous at best, but after that call with Hale, he wasn't willing to ignore any possibilities. Maybe Hale wasn't just trying to protect Ethan, maybe he had been keeping tabs on MIA as well. After all, she had access to a lot of sensitive information about Ethan's business dealings, and if anyone wanted to silence him or get in his way, they would target those closest to him. It didn't make sense to think that MIA could be a target, but the more Ethan thought about it, the more it started to seem like there were more players in this game than he had initially realized. Without responding to Mia's message immediately, he tucked his phone back into his pocket and looked around the terminal, hoping to spot someone who might be watching him too. He noticed a couple of figures standing near the far wall, their postures slightly rigid, as if they were trying too hard to blend in. He caught their eyes for a brief moment, and in that instant, both men quickly turned away, attempting to act casual but failing miserably. His pulse quickened. It was as if someone, or something, was closing in, pushing him into a corner he didn't want to be in. This was no longer just a business deal or a curious coincidence. This was starting to feel like a deliberate attack on everything Ethan had worked for, and worse still, the people he cared about. He had no choice but to leave the terminal, not knowing what kind of danger MIA might be in, or what he was stepping into by pursuing this any further. But as he rushed toward the exit, another unsettling thought crossed his mind. Was it possible that MIA had known more about all of this than she had let on? Ethan had always thought of her as a loyal ally, someone who could be trusted without question. But now, with everything unfolding in front of him, it was hard to ignore the possibility that MIA might be hiding something from him. She had never given him any reason to doubt her, but the last few days had taught him that trust was a fragile thing. As he drove to Mia's apartment, Ethan replayed every conversation they'd had, trying to remember if there were any subtle signs that she might be involved in something shady. Was it possible that she had been in contact with Gregory Hale? Had she known about the investor's plans long before he did? He shook his head, trying to push those thoughts aside. There was no way she was part of this. Or was there? The mystery was starting to unravel in ways that made everything feel uncertain. If MIA wasn't involved, then who could be behind all this? When he arrived at her building, the air seemed thick with tension. The usual hustle and bustle of the neighborhood felt distant, as if the world had frozen for a brief moment. Ethan rushed up the stairs to her floor, his hand gripping the railing tightly as if to steady himself. The closer he got, the more his instincts screamed that something was wrong. The door to Mia's apartment was slightly ajar, and there was no sign of movement inside. He pushed it open slowly, his heart racing in his chest. The apartment was eerily quiet, the only sound being the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. MIA, he called out cautiously, stepping further inside. His eyes scanned the room, looking for any sign of her. Everything appeared normal, her jacket draped over the back of a chair, a few books scattered on the coffee table, her phone charging on the counter. But something was off. He noticed a faint scent of something burning in the air, like the remnants of a cigarette or maybe something else, but before he could process it fully, his eyes landed on the desk. There, amidst a pile of papers, was an envelope. It wasn't like the usual paperwork MIA kept around, this one was sealed, just like the one he had seen in the terminal. His breath caught as he approached it, the unmistakable weight of suspicion creeping over him. With a careful hand, he opened it, unfolding the paper inside. The message was simple, written in a hurried scrawl: "Stop digging. It's too late for you now. There's no turning back." Ethan's stomach dropped. The words felt like a direct warning, a threat. But who had left it? And why in Mia's apartment? Was this a sign that MIA had already been pulled into something much darker than she let on? The possibility gnawed at him, but there was one thing he knew for sure: he couldn't trust anyone completely anymore. Everyone had an agenda, and he had no idea who was truly on his side. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from behind him. Ethan spun around, his heart leaping into his throat. The door to the apartment slammed shut behind him, and the silhouette of a figure appeared in the doorway. He couldn't make out their face, but the silhouette was unmistakable, tall, broad-shouldered, and menacing. Before he could react, the figure lunged toward him, and the room seemed to go black. Ethan's last thought before everything went dark was that whatever had started with a simple stumble over a suitcase had spiraled into something much bigger. The danger was no longer just about business, it was about survival. And the more he uncovered, the more he realized that the people closest to him might not be who they seemed. The question now wasn't just who could he trust, it was who could he trust enough to keep him alive. And if MIA was involved in this, was she the one pulling the strings all along, or was she another victim caught in a web much larger than either of them had ever imagined? When Ethan regained consciousness, it was the cold, hard floor beneath him that alerted him first. His head throbbed, and his vision swam in and out of focus, but the stark reality of the situation was already sinking in. His breath came in shallow gasps as he struggled to sit up, the sharp edges of panic clawing at his chest. The apartment was eerily silent, the faint smell of burning still lingering in the air. His mind raced as he tried to piece together what had just happened. One moment, he had been standing in front of Mia's desk, holding that ominous envelope. The next, he was on the floor, the world spinning around him, with no idea who had done this to him, or worse, why. Slowly, Ethan pushed himself up, his hands trembling as he wiped the sweat from his forehead. His heart was pounding. He had no idea how long he'd been unconscious, but it felt like an eternity. His first instinct was to grab his phone, to reach out to someone, anyone, but as his hand fumbled around the desk, it was gone. His phone was missing. He froze. He had left it on the counter. It was the only way he had been able to communicate with MIA. Now, it was gone, too. Someone had been in the apartment, someone who had taken it. His breath quickened, and a rising sense of dread washed over him. The message, the warning, the figure in the doorway, everything was starting to feel like a terrible nightmare, one that he couldn't escape. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. He was in serious danger. This wasn't just about business anymore. Someone wanted him out of the picture, and they were willing to go to any lengths to make it happen. The fact that he was still alive meant that they hadn't gotten what they wanted yet. But what was that? What was the endgame? He had no answers, only more questions. Ethan stumbled to his feet, the dizziness making it hard to focus. He had to get out of there. He had to find MIA. She was the only link left in all of this, the one person who might have the answers he needed, or at least help him make sense of everything that was happening. But as he moved toward the door, something caught his eye. A small, almost unnoticeable detail on the floor near the desk. It was a piece of paper, crumpled and discarded. Ethan bent down to pick it up, his fingers trembling as he smoothed it out. It was another message, another warning, but this one was different. It was typed, not handwritten, and the words were clear and direct. Don't follow the trail. We know where you are. You're already too deep in this. Walk away now before it's too late. Ethan felt his blood run cold. This wasn't a message from MIA. This was from someone else, someone who had been watching him. His pulse quickened as he thought about the possible implications. Who could it be? Who was behind all this? The investors? Gregory Hale? MIA herself? He had trusted her, he had trusted all of them, and now he didn't know who to turn to. His thoughts were interrupted by the sudden, sharp ringing of a phone, a sound that didn't seem to belong in the silence of the apartment. Ethan's head snapped toward the source, and he realized it was coming from the other room. The phone. His phone. It had to be. He had left it charging on the kitchen counter, but now, it seemed to be coming from the hallway. His heart skipped a beat as he made his way toward the sound, moving cautiously, as if the very air around him could betray him at any moment. When he reached the hallway, his eyes scanned the area. The phone was lying on the floor near the entrance, but when he picked it up, there was no indication of who had called. The screen was black, and there were no new notifications. Ethan's mind raced. Could the call have been a trap? A way to draw him further into whatever this was? He didn't know, but he wasn't about to let his guard down. The apartment was starting to feel smaller, suffocating almost, and the walls seemed to close in with each passing second. His mind couldn't make sense of what was happening. A simple business deal had spiraled into something far more dangerous. People he had known and trusted, people he had once worked with, were now suspects, and the people behind this were playing a game he didn't understand. But what terrified him more than anything was the growing sense that he wasn't just the victim, he was a pawn in someone else's plan. He needed answers, but more importantly, he needed to figure out who was watching him. Who was always one step ahead. As if on cue, a sudden thought hit him like a ton of bricks. What if he was being watched right now? What if there was someone in the apartment, waiting for him to make his next move, ready to strike as soon as he made a mistake? The paranoia was starting to get to him, clouding his judgment, but he couldn't help it. Every instinct was telling him that he was being set up, but by who? And why? He rushed to the door and checked the hallway, but there was nothing out of the ordinary. No one. Just an empty, quiet corridor. But as he stepped back into the apartment, a chilling thought occurred to him. What if MIA had already been taken? What if she was already part of this, a pawn herself, or worse, someone who had been manipulated into keeping him in the dark? Was she in danger too? Or was she part of the danger? His mind raced with possible scenarios, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't shake the feeling that something far bigger was at play here. This wasn't just about business anymore. There was something personal behind all of this, something deep, something old. It wasn't just a case of backstabbing investors or shady dealings, it was a conspiracy. And Ethan, for reasons he still didn't fully understand, was at the very center of it. But just as he began to pace the room, his phone rang again, this time with a message. His breath caught as he saw the name on the screen, MIA. She had sent a text. They know. They know about you. It's too late for me. I tried to warn you, but I can't protect you anymore. The message hit him like a physical blow. His thoughts exploded in every direction as the realization set in MIA was part of this. She had been feeding him pieces of the puzzle all along, but what she hadn't told him was how deeply entangled she was in it. The betrayal, the lies, it all felt like it was closing in on him, like a vice tightening around his chest. And then, as if to confirm his worst fears, the sound of a car door slamming outside the apartment broke the silence. It was too late to turn back now. The stakes were higher than they had ever been before. Ethan wasn't just facing a business deal gone wrong. He was in the middle of something far darker, and someone, maybe even someone he once trusted, was watching every move he made. The room felt smaller, darker, as the weight of the mystery pressed down on him. Who could he trust now? Would he make it out alive? The questions stacked up like a pile of bricks, and the answers seemed just out of reach. But one thing was clear, the deeper he dug, the more dangerous it became. And as the seconds ticked by, Ethan realized he was running out of time. Just as Ethan was about to make his way out of Mia's apartment, the unease gnawing at him threatening to swallow him whole, he paused at the door. His fingers trembled on the doorknob, and for a split second, he considered going to the police, seeking help from someone who could make sense of everything. But who could he trust? The only people he had relied on had either disappeared, betrayed him, or, like MIA, left him with cryptic warnings that only made the situation worse. He couldn't shake the feeling that the walls were closing in on him, and he was trapped in a game where the rules kept changing. But something, deep inside, told him he was missing a key detail. It was that nagging feeling, the kind of gut instinct you get when you've seen a picture and you know something doesn't add up, but you can't quite figure out what. As he stood frozen in the doorway, trying to steady his breathing, a familiar sound echoed from the kitchen. It was soft at first, almost imperceptible, a faint rustling, like paper being shuffled. Ethan turned on his heels, his heart skipping a beat. He wasn't alone. But he hadn't heard anyone enter. His eyes darted around the apartment, scanning for any sign of movement, any clue that might explain the strange noise. And then, just as quickly as it had started, the noise stopped. Silence. For a moment, everything seemed still. Ethan's pulse pounded in his ears, and his fingers tightened around the doorknob as if he might burst through it at any moment. He was on edge, so caught up in the paranoia and fear that had overtaken him. But he had to stay sharp. He had to find MIA. His feet moved almost instinctively, carrying him back toward the kitchen, his body a blur of tense energy. He approached the counter where Mia's phone had been charging earlier, still expecting to find nothing out of the ordinary. But then, something caught his eye. There, in the middle of the counter, was an object he hadn't noticed before, a small, almost inconspicuous black box, one that definitely hadn't been there before. His breath caught in his throat as he reached for it. It was cold to the touch, metallic. He carefully opened it, and inside, nestled like a hidden treasure, was a flash drive. The weight of the situation hit him like a tidal wave. This wasn't just some random device, it was important. It was connected to everything. Without a second thought, he grabbed the flash drive, pocketing it quickly, and walked toward the door. He couldn't afford to waste any more time. He needed to get out, needed to figure out what was on this drive before it was too late. As he made his way out of the building, he glanced over his shoulder, sensing that there was something more going on than he could grasp. Who had left the flash drive there? Was it MIA? Or was it someone else, someone who had been in the apartment all along, watching him, waiting for the right moment to reveal their hand? He didn't have time to think. He just had to go. He needed answers, and the flash drive might just be the key to unlocking everything. It wasn't until he sat in his car, the engine purring beneath him, that he realized how exhausted he was. His mind was spinning, his thoughts a chaotic mess of fragmented clues, half-finished conversations, and unanswered questions. He inserted the flash drive into his laptop, hoping to find anything that would make sense of the web of confusion that had been spiraling around him for days. The screen flickered to life, and he watched as files began to load, his heart racing faster with each passing second. But what he saw on the screen was not what he expected. What appeared was a list of names, dates, locations. The names were familiar, people he had known or worked with, but the dates and locations weren't. They were linked to meetings he hadn't been invited to, deals he had never heard of, business transactions he had no knowledge of. His eyes darted across the screen, searching for something that made sense, but all he found was confusion and secrecy. And then, the last file on the list caught his attention. It was labeled MIA, Final Confession. His stomach twisted into a knot. Why would MIA, his trusted assistant, his closest ally, have a file like that? He clicked on it, hesitating for a moment, unsure if he was ready to confront whatever truth lay behind that file. The video loaded quickly, the screen filled with the grainy image of MIA. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear, as if she were recording this message knowing it might be the last thing she ever did. "Ethan," she said in the video, her voice shaky, "I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. They've been watching me, tracking everything I do. It started small, just little things, but now it's getting worse. The people behind this, they are closer than you think. I tried to protect you, I swear. I tried to stop it, but they wouldn't let me. If you're seeing this, you're already too deep in. They know what you know. And there's no way out." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. His mind was reeling. MIA was confessing. She had known more than she had ever let on. But there was something in her eyes, something raw and terrified, that made him pause. The fear in her face was real, and for the first time, he wasn't sure if she was the villain in this story or if she had been a victim all along. But the most shocking part came next. MIA looked directly into the camera, her expression a mix of desperation and resolve. "There's one person you need to find. The person behind it all. The one who's been pulling the strings. His name is Gregory Hale. He's the one who orchestrated everything, he's the one who set you up. But Ethan, there's something you don't know. Hale is my father." The words hit Ethan like a slap to the face. He recoiled from the screen, his heart racing, his mind struggling to process the revelation. Gregory Hale, her father? It didn't make sense. Everything he had learned about Hale painted him as the mastermind behind the shady deals, the underhanded schemes, the manipulation that had been creeping into Ethan's life. But MIA was his daughter. That was the moment everything changed. Ethan had thought he was being played by an external force, but now, it felt like he had been manipulated by someone inside his circle all along. MIA, the person he had trusted most, had been keeping secrets, hiding her connections to Hale, and now everything felt like a carefully orchestrated plot, one that was still unraveling. The truth wasn't just out of reach, it was redefined. Every assumption Ethan had made, every conclusion he had drawn, was now cast into doubt. He wasn't sure who to trust anymore, or if there was anyone left who could help him. Hale's role in this was more personal than he could have ever imagined, and the stakes were higher than ever. As he stared at the screen, a new question emerged in his mind: was MIA truly trying to protect him, or had she been playing him all along? And the worst part? He had no idea what Hale's ultimate plan was. Was he trying to destroy Ethan, or was he trying to recruit him into something even darker? The mystery had just taken a turn into the unknown, and now Ethan was no longer sure whether he was the pawn or the player. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that everything was spiraling out of his control. The revelation about MIA, that chilling confession from her video, hit him harder than anything else so far. The image of her frightened, vulnerable face was seared into his mind. She had been keeping secrets, yes, but now he couldn't even be sure if she was an ally or an unwitting pawn in her father's game. The truth about Gregory Hale, her father, twisted everything Ethan thought he understood about the situation. Was she a victim in all this, or had she played him from the beginning? And more importantly, if MIA had been lying to him, who else in his life was hiding something just as dangerous? His car sped down the road, the headlights slicing through the darkness as his mind raced in 100 different directions. It was soft at first, almost imperceptible, a faint rustling, like paper being shuffled. Ethan turned on his heels, his heart skipping a beat. He wasn't alone. But he hadn't heard anyone enter. His eyes darted around the apartment, scanning for any sign of movement, any clue that might explain the strange noise. And then, just as quickly as it had started, the noise stopped. Silence. For a moment, everything seemed still. Ethan's pulse pounded in his ears, and his fingers tightened around the doorknob as if he might burst through it at any moment. He was on edge, so caught up in the paranoia and fear that had overtaken him. But he had to stay sharp. He had to find MIA. His feet moved almost instinctively, carrying him back toward the kitchen, his body a blur of tense energy. He approached the counter where Mia's phone had been charging earlier, still expecting to find nothing out of the ordinary. But then, something caught his eye. There, in the middle of the counter, was an object he hadn't noticed before, a small, almost inconspicuous black box, one that definitely hadn't been there before. His breath caught in his throat as he reached for it. It was cold to the touch, metallic. He carefully opened it, and inside, nestled like a hidden treasure, was a flash drive. The weight of the situation hit him like a tidal wave. This wasn't just some random device, it was important. It was connected to everything. Without a second thought, he grabbed the flash drive, pocketing it quickly, and walked toward the door. He couldn't afford to waste any more time. He needed to get out, needed to figure out what was on this drive before it was too late. As he made his way out of the building, he glanced over his shoulder, sensing that there was something more going on than he could grasp. Who had left the flash drive there? Was it MIA? Or was it someone else, someone who had been in the apartment all along, watching him, waiting for the right moment to reveal their hand? He didn't have time to think. He just had to go. He needed answers, and the flash drive might just be the key to unlocking everything. It wasn't until he sat in his car, the engine purring beneath him, that he realized how exhausted he was. His mind was spinning, his thoughts a chaotic mess of fragmented clues, half-finished conversations, and unanswered questions. He inserted the flash drive into his laptop, hoping to find anything that would make sense of the web of confusion that had been spiraling around him for days. The screen flickered to life, and he watched as files began to load, his heart racing faster with each passing second. But what he saw on the screen was not what he expected. What appeared was a list of names, dates, locations. The names were familiar, people he had known or worked with, but the dates and locations weren't. They were linked to meetings he hadn't been invited to, deals he had never heard of, business transactions he had no knowledge of. His eyes darted across the screen, searching for something that made sense, but all he found was confusion and secrecy. And then, the last file on the list caught his attention. It was labeled MIA, Final Confession. His stomach twisted into a knot. Why would MIA, his trusted assistant, his closest ally, have a file like that? He clicked on it, hesitating for a moment, unsure if he was ready to confront whatever truth lay behind that file. The video loaded quickly, the screen filled with the grainy image of MIA. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear, as if she were recording this message knowing it might be the last thing she ever did. "Ethan," she said in the video, her voice shaky, "I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. They've been watching me, tracking everything I do. It started small, just little things, but now it's getting worse. The people behind this, they are closer than you think. I tried to protect you, I swear. I tried to stop it, but they wouldn't let me. If you're seeing this, you're already too deep in. They know what you know. And there's no way out." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. His mind was reeling. MIA was confessing. She had known more than she had ever let on. But there was something in her eyes, something raw and terrified, that made him pause. The fear in her face was real, and for the first time, he wasn't sure if she was the villain in this story or if she had been a victim all along. But the most shocking part came next. MIA looked directly into the camera, her expression a mix of desperation and resolve. "There's one person you need to find. The person behind it all. The one who's been pulling the strings. His name is Gregory Hale. He's the one who orchestrated everything, he's the one who set you up. But Ethan, there's something you don't know. Hale is my father." The words hit Ethan like a slap to the face. He recoiled from the screen, his heart racing, his mind struggling to process the revelation. Gregory Hale, her father? It didn't make sense. Everything he had learned about Hale painted him as the mastermind behind the shady deals, the underhanded schemes, the manipulation that had been creeping into Ethan's life. But MIA was his daughter. That was the moment everything changed. Ethan had thought he was being played by an external force, but now, it felt like he had been manipulated by someone inside his circle all along. MIA, the person he had trusted most, had been keeping secrets, hiding her connections to Hale, and now everything felt like a carefully orchestrated plot, one that was still unraveling. The truth wasn't just out of reach, it was redefined. Every assumption Ethan had made, every conclusion he had drawn, was now cast into doubt. He wasn't sure who to trust anymore, or if there was anyone left who could help him. Hale's role in this was more personal than he could have ever imagined, and the stakes were higher than ever. As he stared at the screen, a new question emerged in his mind: was MIA truly trying to protect him, or had she been playing him all along? And the worst part? He had no idea what Hale's ultimate plan was. Was he trying to destroy Ethan, or was he trying to recruit him into something even darker? The mystery had just taken a turn into the unknown, and now Ethan was no longer sure whether he was the pawn or the player. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that everything was spiraling out of his control. The revelation about MIA, that chilling confession from her video, hit him harder than anything else so far. The image of her frightened, vulnerable face was seared into his mind. She had been keeping secrets, yes, but now he couldn't even be sure if she was an ally or an unwitting pawn in her father's game. The truth about Gregory Hale, her father, twisted everything Ethan thought he understood about the situation. Was she a victim in all this, or had she played him from the beginning? And more importantly, if MIA had been lying to him, who else in his life was hiding something just as dangerous? His car sped down the road, the headlights slicing through the darkness as his mind raced in 100 different directions. He thought about what MIA had said in her video: "They know what you know." Those words haunted him. Who exactly was they? And why were they targeting him? The more he thought about it, the more everything seemed connected: the investors, Gregory Hale, the cryptic messages, the threats. It was as if he were trapped in a web, every thread leading back to the same people, all of them with their own agendas, their own pieces of the puzzle. Ethan had always considered himself a man who could think his way out of any situation, but this wasn't just a puzzle, it was a trap. And no matter how hard he tried to break free, the pieces kept pulling him deeper into the chaos. He couldn't trust anyone. Not MIA. Not Gregory. Not even his own instincts, which were now clouded with paranoia and confusion. The question, however, wasn't just who he could trust, it was who he could confront. Who would give him the answers he needed without destroying him in the process? He needed to know what Gregory Hale was really after. He needed to understand why MIA had kept him in the dark. And he needed to make a choice. The moment had arrived. The ultimatum had been delivered. As he drove, a text came through on his phone. The number was unfamiliar, but the message was clear: "You've come this far. Now you have to choose. The truth, or your life." Ethan's grip tightened on the steering wheel, his heart pounding in his chest. It was like something out of a thriller, some kind of twisted game. Whoever had sent the message knew too much about him, too much about the decisions he'd been making over the past few days. The stakes had never been higher. He wasn't just fighting to survive anymore, he was fighting to uncover the truth, even if it meant tearing apart everything he thought he knew. He pulled over to the side of the road, his pulse racing. He stared at the message for what felt like an eternity, his mind running in circles. The offer was simple, yet horrifyingly complex. It was a choice between two evils. But it wasn't as simple as choosing between life and death. It was a decision that would change everything. He could walk away from it all, run, and try to escape this nightmare, but that would mean abandoning the truth, leaving MIA behind, and potentially never knowing what Hale had planned. Or he could go further, dig deeper, and expose the truth even if it meant risking everything, even his life. Ethan didn't know how much longer he could keep running from the truth, but that didn't make the choice any easier. In that moment, as he sat in the darkness of his car, his thoughts turned to MIA. She had been there for him, hadn't she? Or had she? Had everything been a lie from the start? He couldn't ignore the feeling that MIA had been keeping him in the dark, leading him into this storm on purpose. But then, there was that look on her face in the video, the raw fear in her eyes. She wasn't in control, either. Whoever was pulling the strings had her trapped just as much as he was trapped. If MIA had really tried to warn him, to protect him, then maybe, just maybe, he could trust her. But could he really afford to take that risk? And what if she had already crossed a line that he could never come back from? The weight of the decision pressed on him like a physical force. He knew that whatever choice he made would change everything. There was no going back. He could feel the tension building in his chest, his mind unable to focus on anything except the looming uncertainty that seemed to be swallowing him whole. As much as he wanted to make the right decision, he wasn't sure if there even was a right decision anymore. His phone buzzed again, pulling him from his thoughts. This time, it was a call. The name on the screen made his stomach drop. Gregory Hale. He hesitated, staring at the phone for a moment, unsure of what to do. He didn't know what Hale wanted or what game he was playing, but one thing was certain: this was the man who held the answers. This was the person who had been orchestrating the chaos from the very beginning. If Ethan wanted to make it out of this alive, he needed to face Hale. He needed to confront him and find out what he was truly after. With a shaky breath, Ethan answered the call. The voice on the other end was calm, almost too calm, as if Hale were waiting for this moment all along. "I was wondering when you'd finally call." Hale's voice came through the phone, smooth and calculated. "You've been circling around the truth for days now, Ethan, but you're still not seeing the whole picture." Ethan's heart raced, but he tried to keep his voice steady. "What do you want from me?" Hale chuckled, a sound that sent a chill down Ethan's spine. "I don't want anything from you. I've already taken everything I need. You're the one who's still looking for answers. The question is, do you really want the truth, or are you just trying to survive? Because, Ethan, sometimes the truth is more dangerous than you think." The words hung in the air, the tension thickening with every passing second. Hale was playing some kind of game, and Ethan was caught in the middle of it. The stakes had just been raised higher than ever before. If he pushed forward, there was no telling where it would lead. He was already too far in, and it felt like every step brought him closer to something he wasn't ready for. But there was no turning back now. He had to know the truth, even if it meant sacrificing everything. "I'm done being your pawn," Ethan said, his voice trembling with anger and determination. "Tell me what you want. Tell me everything." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment, Ethan thought the call had ended. But then Hale spoke again, his voice low and dangerous. "You're not the one in control here, Ethan. You never were. But don't worry, you'll get your answers soon enough. And when you do, you'll wish you never asked the questions." The line went dead. Ethan sat in the car, his heart racing. Every breath felt like it was too much. The phone slipped from his hand, landing in his lap as his mind reeled from the gravity of Hale's words. He wasn't just caught in a business deal gone wrong. He wasn't just uncovering a conspiracy. He was caught in a game with stakes higher than he could possibly imagine. And the most terrifying part was, he wasn't sure if he was playing it or if it was playing him. Now, more than ever, Ethan realized he didn't just need to survive. He needed to outsmart Hale, outplay everyone, and somehow, make it out with the truth and his life intact. But every move he made seemed to lead him deeper into a trap. The choices in front of him were impossible, and the cost of failure was more than he could bear. The countdown had begun. Ethan's head was spinning as he drove through the dark streets, the hum of the tires on the road barely cutting through the storm raging inside his mind. He had just spoken to Gregory Hale, and the man's cryptic words echoed in his ears, pulling him deeper into the chaos that had already consumed his life. "You'll wish you never asked the questions," Hale had said. Ethan hadn't realized just how much truth there was in that statement until now. Every layer of this conspiracy, every lie and half-truth, had only served to mask the true scale of what was happening. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was a web that reached farther than he could have ever imagined. People he thought he could trust were now revealed as nothing more than puppets in a game controlled by forces beyond his comprehension. And the worst part? He still didn't know who the true mastermind was, or what their endgame was. His phone buzzed again, and he glanced at the screen, his pulse spiking when he saw Mia's name. He answered quickly, not giving himself time to second-guess. "MIA, what's going on? What have you been hiding from me?" His voice was sharp, angry even, the frustration of days of uncertainty breaking through. "MIA," the voice on the other end sounded strangely calm, too calm. "It wasn't MIA. It was someone else." Ethan's blood ran cold as the voice continued. She's not here right now. But I can tell you what you need to know. The voice paused, and a laugh followed, cold and mocking. You've been running around in circles, Ethan. You think this is just about you? It's much bigger than that. Ethan's grip on the steering wheel tightened, his heart hammering in his chest. Who is this? The voice didn't answer directly. Instead, it spoke like it had been waiting for this moment, eager to pull Ethan deeper into the abyss. You're right about one thing. The conspiracy does involve you. But it involves a hell of a lot more people than you think. You've been too focused on the wrong things, on MIA, on Gregory Hale, on your so-called enemies. You missed the real game. You've been set up from the start, and it's not just about business or power. It's about something much darker. Ethan's thoughts were racing now. He had been too focused on Hale, too obsessed with uncovering the truth about MIA and her father. He'd been following breadcrumbs that had led him in the wrong direction entirely. But now, the scale of this was shifting before his eyes. Whoever this was, they knew more than anyone else. And they were toying with him. Why are you telling me this? Ethan's voice was low, steady despite the rising panic inside him. The voice on the other end didn't respond at first. There was a long pause, and then it came, cold and cutting. Because you're too far in now, Ethan. You think you're playing this game? You're not. You're the one being played. The people who have been pulling the strings, they have their own agenda. And you're not a part of it. You're just the pawn. Always have been. Always will be. Ethan's stomach dropped, and he slammed his fist on the dashboard in frustration. The pieces were falling into place now, but they weren't falling in any way he could have expected. This wasn't just a corporate conspiracy. It wasn't just a power struggle between two men. No, this was something bigger, something more dangerous. And Ethan had been too blind to see it until now. But he was running out of time. You're lying, Ethan spat, trying to hold on to some semblance of control. You're trying to mess with my head. Who the hell are you? The voice laughed again, but this time it was different. There was something darker in it, something that sent a chill down Ethan's spine. You want to know who I am? Fine. You'll find out soon enough. But here's a little hint. Someone you trust, someone who's been right in front of you this whole time, has been working with us. They've been setting you up for a fall. Everything you've done, every move you've made, has played right into their hands. Ethan froze. Someone I trust. The words hit him like a punch to the gut. Who? He thought of everyone in his life MIA, who had warned him, but also kept secrets. Gregory Hale, who had always been an elusive, dangerous figure in the background, even the people in his office, the investors, and colleagues who'd seemed so invested in the deals he'd been running. But one name stood out in his mind, one person who had been by his side since the very beginning. His pulse quickened as a realization began to form, sharp and brutal. The person he had been closest to, the one he'd trusted more than anyone else, wasn't on his side. Ethan's mind raced, trying to piece together the moments, the interactions, the subtle clues he had missed. How could I have been so blind? He slammed his foot on the accelerator, speeding through the streets, urgency flooding his veins. He had to find out who this was before it was too late. The phone buzzed in his hand again, and Ethan didn't even hesitate before answering. Ethan, you need to listen carefully. Mia's voice came through the phone, but this time, it sounded different, distant, almost resigned. I don't have much time. Whatever you're doing, stop. Stop right now. They're on to you. They're watching every move you make. Ethan's breath caught in his throat, confusion and fear crashing over him. MIA, what's going on? Who's behind this? You have to tell me. But MIA cut him off, her voice sharp, filled with a sense of finality. It's not just Hale. You've been played from the start. Your business partner, James Miller, he's the one. He's the one who's been orchestrating everything. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. James. Ethan's closest business partner, the person he had worked alongside for years, trusted implicitly. The one who had been there through every deal, every negotiation, every win and loss. The one person Ethan never suspected. James Miller. You're lying. Ethan shouted, his voice desperate, disbelief choking his words. James wouldn't do that. He's my closest ally. But Mia's voice was cold and final. He's not who you think he is, Ethan. The sooner you realize that, the better. You're running out of time. The call ended abruptly. Ethan's hands were shaking now. His mind was a whirlwind of confusion and anger. James, the man who had been by his side for so long, the man who had been the face of every success Ethan had ever had, was behind this. But why? He knew what he had to do. There was no time left to second guess. Ethan made a sharp turn down a side street, heading straight for James's office. Every step, every decision, felt heavier now, as if he were walking into a trap he couldn't escape. He had trusted James more than anyone, but the truth was undeniable now. The lies had been building for months, and it was all coming to a head. As he pulled up to the office building, his hands trembled on the steering wheel. The door to the building loomed ahead of him like a portal to a world he couldn't control. The moment he stepped inside, there would be no going back. James would either admit everything, or he would do whatever it took to make sure Ethan never walked out alive. The stakes were higher than ever, and Ethan could feel the walls closing in. He had to confront James now, before everything he had worked for was destroyed, before his life was shattered beyond repair. The truth, and his future, depended on it. Ethan's heart hammered in his chest as he stood in front of the sleek glass doors of the office building. The city lights flickered outside, casting a dim glow on the pavement beneath his feet. Every instinct screamed at him to turn back, to walk away and protect himself from whatever storm was about to hit. But he couldn't. Not anymore. Not after everything that had happened, not after the truth about James had been laid bare. The pieces were finally falling into place, but they had been so carefully hidden, so expertly manipulated, that even now, as he stood on the edge, he wasn't sure how deep the rabbit hole went. With a trembling hand, Ethan pushed open the door and stepped inside. The building was eerily quiet, too quiet for the time of night. The soft hum of fluorescent lights overhead was the only sound that filled the space, and for a brief moment, he felt like he was walking into a void. A void that had been designed just for him, a maze of lies, betrayal, and a network of people he once trusted but now knew had been pulling the strings all along. He moved through the hallway with purpose, his steps echoing in the silence. Each turn felt more ominous than the last, and the deeper he went, the more he could feel the weight of the danger pressing in from all sides. James's office was at the end of the hall, and Ethan could feel the presence of his old friend even before he reached the door. The air seemed to thicken with the knowledge that, in just a few moments, everything would change. When Ethan finally reached the door, his hand hovered over the handle, hesitating just for a split second. He had come this far, uncovered so many truths that it felt like the world itself had been turned upside down. He had been played by James, by Gregory Hale, by everyone around him, but that was all about to end. It had to end. He opened the door. The room was dark, only a few lights shining down on the large desk in the center. But there, sitting behind the desk, was James. His old friend, the man he had trusted more than anyone. The man who had orchestrated the entire game. "Ethan," James said, his voice calm and collected, as if this moment were nothing more than a casual meeting between business partners. "I was wondering when you'd show up. It's a shame you had to come all this way, but it was inevitable. I knew you'd figure it out eventually. But by the time you did, it would be too late." Ethan's jaw clenched, the anger rising in his chest like a fire. He had spent days chasing answers, gathering fragments of a truth that had been withheld from him at every turn. He had trusted James with everything, his career, his future, his life, and this whole time, James had been pulling the strings, manipulating him like a puppet. And now, standing in front of him, James was still so calm, so sure of himself, it made Ethan sick. "You set me up," Ethan said, his voice tight, but with a quiet fury. "You used me. You used everyone. For what? What's the endgame, James? Power? Money?" James smiled, but it wasn't the warm smile Ethan remembered. It was cold, calculating, and full of something dark that Ethan hadn't seen before. "You really don't get it, do you, Ethan? This isn't about power. It's not about money. It's about control. The game was never about you. It was about them, the investors, the people behind all this. The ones who pulled Hale's strings and set everything in motion. You've been chasing shadows, Ethan, but the truth was always right in front of you. The final piece was always there, just waiting for you to notice. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. What the hell are you talking about? James leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of his face. You think Hale is the mastermind? No. He's just a pawn in all of this. You're right about one thing, I used you. But only to get you to the truth. The truth about what's really going on. And now that you're here, you can finally see the big picture. But by the time you do, it'll be too late. You're just a piece of the puzzle. And that's all you'll ever be. A piece. Disposable. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine as the implications of James's words sank in. It wasn't just about him. It had never been about him. This was bigger than anything he had imagined, a conspiracy that reached deeper and farther than he could have ever anticipated. But there was something else, something that didn't quite make sense. If James had been playing him all along, then why now? Why was James revealing everything to him? Was this just another move in a game that had been going on longer than Ethan could even comprehend? Why tell me all this now? Ethan asked, his voice low, still trying to make sense of it all. Why not keep me in the dark? James's eyes darkened as he looked at Ethan, and the smile that had been on his lips vanished. Because I'm done with the lies, Ethan. The game is over. You've already crossed the point of no return. The only question left is, will you choose to be part of the solution, or will you be a casualty of the truth? Before Ethan could respond, the lights in the room suddenly flickered, and a loud crash came from the hallway. Ethan's heart leaped into his throat as he spun toward the door. It wasn't just the two of them anymore. The atmosphere in the room shifted, and the urgency was palpable. Someone else was here. Someone else who was part of the game, someone who had been waiting in the shadows all along. The door to the office slammed open, and a figure stepped inside, their face hidden in the darkness. The figure moved with purpose, slow and deliberate, until they stepped into the light. Ethan's eyes widened in shock as he recognized the person standing in front of him, MIA. Her expression was cold, distant, and for a moment, Ethan couldn't believe what he was seeing. MIA? The woman he had trusted, the one who had claimed to be trying to protect him, was standing there, eyes narrowed, her posture tense. MIA? Ethan's voice was barely above a whisper, a mix of confusion and betrayal in his chest. What the hell is going on? MIA didn't speak at first. Instead, she walked forward, her gaze locked onto James, as if they shared some unspoken understanding. It's over, Ethan, she said, her voice calm but with an unmistakable finality. You're too late. Ethan's mind was racing, the realization crashing over him like a wave. The pieces clicked into place, but they didn't make sense. MIA, his ally, had been working with James all along. She was part of the conspiracy, part of the game he had been unknowingly playing. But why? What did she stand to gain? Before Ethan could process what had just happened, MIA turned toward him, her eyes filled with a mixture of pity and resolve. You never understood, Ethan. You never understood the bigger picture. You were always too focused on the details. And that's why you're out of the game now. It's over. The words stung, cutting deeper than anything else. Ethan could feel the betrayal deep in his bones, but he wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. There was something missing, something they had overlooked. And as the room seemed to close in around him, he realized there was one final twist he hadn't seen coming. The truth wasn't just about the conspiracy, it was about what came next. Ethan wasn't a pawn in their game. He was the wild card. And in the chaos that was about to unfold, he was going to play the final hand. Game over, Ethan said, his voice low but filled with a burning resolve. But not for me. And just as everything seemed to come to a head, everything was about to change once again. You said the dust had barely settled when Ethan stepped out into the night, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts that refused to come together. It was over, at least in the way he had once understood it. James, MIA, the game, it was all done now. The conspiracy had been revealed in its horrifying magnitude, but in the end, it wasn't the power or the money that had driven everything. No, it was control. The kind of control that had made him, his business, and everyone he trusted into nothing more than chess pieces in a game played by invisible hands. He had spent so much time chasing the truth, but what he didn't realize until it was almost too late was that the truth was never the goal. It was the game itself that mattered to those in charge. And in the end, those who played were the ones who controlled the board, shaping everything according to their whims. But as Ethan walked through the quiet streets of the city, he felt the weight of everything that had happened, everything he had lost. Mia's betrayal still burned in his chest, but there was something deeper there, too. An understanding that this entire journey wasn't about uncovering hidden truths, it was about finding himself. The man who had walked into that office, filled with confusion and distrust, was no longer the same man. The man who walked out of it had learned something far more valuable than any corporate secret or twisted conspiracy. He had learned how to trust himself, how to rise above the games others played, and how to reclaim his life in a world where nothing was ever what it seemed. Mia was gone now, lost in the chaos of a system that had chewed up and spit out more than its fair share of victims. And James? He had disappeared into the shadows as well, his part in the conspiracy over, leaving behind only the remnants of the world he had tried to build, a world where no one was truly safe from manipulation. Ethan had thought he was the one being played all along, but in reality, he had been the one who had played the final hand. As he stood there, the cold wind biting at his skin, a strange sense of peace washed over him. The battle was over, but the scars it had left would stay with him forever. Still, there were no easy answers. There was no perfect closure. The truth had come to light, yes, but the cost had been high. Ethan had lost so much. His trust, his faith in the people around him, his career, it all felt like it had been swept away by the tide of corruption and greed that had permeated every part of his life. But as he looked up at the city skyline, the neon lights flickering like distant stars, he knew one thing for sure: it wasn't over. Not for him. Not for anyone who had been touched by the chaos of this world. There would always be another layer to peel back, another secret to uncover. The game never really ended, and those in power would always find a way to keep playing. But that didn't mean he had to play by their rules anymore. Ethan paused for a moment, his breath rising in the cool night air, and something in him shifted. He wasn't the same man who had walked into this mess, so desperate for answers, so eager to unravel the mystery of it all. He had learned something along the way, something about power, about trust, and about the lengths people would go to in order to stay on top. The world wasn't black and white. It wasn't clean or simple. It was a web of contradictions, of choices made and choices forced upon others, of hidden motives and dark secrets, and no matter how hard you tried to escape, it would always pull you back in. But Ethan was different now. He knew what he had to do. And as the city hummed around him, he realized that while the conspiracy might have been over, the road ahead was far from predictable. He would never be able to return to the life he had known before. The man he was now could never go back to the past, to the days before the truth had shattered everything he believed. But that wasn't a tragedy. It was a beginning. As he turned to walk away from the building, toward an uncertain future, Ethan felt the weight of the world lifting off his shoulders, if only for a moment. There was no perfect ending here. No neat, tidy resolution that tied everything up in a bow. Just the knowledge that the game had changed, and so had he. There was no going back, but there was something much more powerful in that. Something that gave him hope. Because he had learned that no matter how deep the conspiracy, no matter how tangled the web, there was always a way out. And in that small, quiet moment, Ethan realized that his true power wasn't in the answers he'd uncovered, it was in the strength to move forward, no matter what. But even as he walked away, there was one last piece of the puzzle he couldn't shake. A question that still lingered in his mind. A question that would haunt him for the rest of his life. What if Mia hadn't been working for the people who had orchestrated everything? What if she had been trying to stop them, to save him, from the very beginning? He would never know. And that, in the end, might be the hardest thing to accept. Because in a world full of secrets, some questions were meant to remain unanswered. The story might be over, but the questions would always linger like shadows in the corners of the mind, impossible to ignore. And just as Ethan turned the corner, a figure stepped out from the darkness, watching him silently from across the street. The figure's face remained hidden, but the presence was unmistakable. A whisper of a shadow, a lingering reminder that no one truly walks away unscathed. The game, it seemed, was never really over. As the scene faded, the city continued to pulse with life, and Ethan, unknowingly, had become part of a much larger story than he could have ever imagined. And in that silence, the weight of what had been left unsaid settled like a heavy fog, wrapping itself around the story, leaving an open-ended question that would echo long after the final credits rolled.